Yeah, I don't need to share. So what I wanted to share is this. There is a headline which came out on March 1st. It says US owes India US dollar 216 billion as American debt sourced to US dollar 23 trillion, which means actually India has given to US 216 billion. And that article further goes on to say China has given to US 1 trillion US dollars. Japan, 1 trillion US dollars. And Brazil, 216 US dollars. And if you look at India, these are foreign currency reserves of India, China, all these countries. And India's foreign currency reserves stands at 542 billion US dollars. I have given that in that paper I wrote, which is actually comes to something like 19 to 20% of India's national income. India's national income is something like 2.8 trillion US dollars. Now, this is a very high amount of Indian national income is kept with US, with foreign countries. And it has got a cost. That cost is, some people have tried to estimate this cost. One economist, Dan Rodriguez, estimated this cost in 2006. And it is something like this, that a country is, IMF has suggested that a country should keep foreign currency reserves worth 3 months, worth 3 months imports. Now this is showing Nai must be the main speaker. My picture should be coming there. Okay, so it is recommended that a country keeps foreign currency reserve 3 months worth import, 3 months, foreign currency worth 3 months imports should be kept. This is to meet a sudden fall in export earnings. In order to deal with this sudden changes in exports, the country is expected to hold 3 months worth of foreign currencies worth 3 months imports. But these developing countries from 1990s have been holding something like 10 foreign currencies worth 10 months imports. So you see that this is a very big amount, and that involves an opportunity cost. So economist Dan Rodriguez has estimated this cost by considering when you keep your assets in foreign currency, you get something like a small percentage of interest returns on that. But if a country were to borrow money in foreign currencies like dollar, let us say an investor in India wants to borrow foreign dollar, they have to pay an interest on that. The difference between these two, they have estimated a cost. In 2006, he estimated that cost for developing countries is something like 1% of the national income. So it is a very high cost these developing countries are incurring. And we can think that if some people have estimated it can be 3%, because if you are to invest that 1%, that national income would rise because these countries are lacking foreign capital. So that way, if you estimate, it can be even 3%. So minimum 1 to 3%. This is a very high cost these poor countries are incurring. Why is this? They are not very senseless in doing this. In the 1980s and in the 1990s, the currencies of the world, currencies of the developing countries actually fluctuated because of very fast movement of currencies. In order to sterilize this, they have to maintain this huge amount of foreign currencies with them. Like Baht collapsed, Argentinian peso collapsed. So this has taught them a lesson. So if suddenly a huge amount of money, foreign currencies come to India, our currency will appreciate. That will, rupee will appreciate and our exports will be harmed. If people take away money from our India, then currency will depreciate. Confidence in the economy will be lost. So therefore, they have to maintain a relative stability. And this is a consequence of financialization. And the financialization affects developed countries and developing countries in different ways. So this is the price that developing countries are paying for financialization. So that is why this topic becomes very important to understand how the financialization operates, affects developed countries and developing countries, and to discuss where does the profits of financialization come. In this today's discussion, I introduce this concept of financialization and discuss why financialization has arisen. So I have in my article, in my paper, I have discussed the three definitions of financialization. Epstein has written on this. It says it is to do with the dominance of financial motives, financial market, financial actors, and financial institutions. An advantage of this definition is that we can put a number on this. And that is how they measure whether a country is financialized or not. According to Greta Krippner, it is the dominance of the financial sector over the real sector in the economy. So finance is dominating the real sector. Now, according to the Marxists, it is a subordination of real accumulation to fictitious capital. So Marx made a distinction between money used for investment, which he called interest-bearing capital, and the money used for other purposes. He also said that this interest, what is interest? Interest is something that the industrial capitalist gives to the money capitalist. It is a small percentage of the profit. So it is real accumulation, something is of the real accumulation is shared with the money capitalist. But Marx also said that once this interest-bearing capital, once the money has lent, it has its own life. So that becomes an asset, and that asset has asset's value. That money, once it is lent, it becomes a separate asset, and asset has its own value. And that asset's value depends not only on how much profit it generates, but also how much profit that asset may create in the future.
Hello. I'm listening to somebody's lecture. Can I ring it back? Yeah? I'll ring you back in a bit. Yeah? All right. Bye.
So therefore, he said it is called a fictitious capital, not because it is made up, but because it has got an element of imagination in it, how much profit it may get in the future. And so this definition of Marxist, which is given by Marxist economics Ben Fine, is the domination. It includes what the others have said. Generally, others have said it is the dominance of the fictitious capital in the economy. Now, any definition of financialization immediately raises the question, how is this different from finance capital? In the beginning of the 20th century, there was an important change in the operation of capital, which was theorized by Hilferding and Lenin. And what they said is that the bank capital and the industrial capital has come together, and banking capital is dominating the industrial capital, and they are dominating. And once they have invested somewhere in colonies, then they want to maintain that investment, maintain their profits. So therefore they create tariff walls, or they have physically colonized them. So that is why imperialism, and that's why Lenin said imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. So that here there was a division of the countries into different regions or different colonies, or maintaining their investment through high tariffs. Now, one writer from London School of Economics who is writing a lot of books on financialization is one person called Kostas Lapvitsas. And he says this financialization and finance capital, he has identified 5 important differences. Now, in the finance capital, the the profits are in the finance capital, profits is coming mainly from investment, increase in the productive investment. Here the finance capital is coming, profit is also coming from personal incomes of the people. And large corporations do not depend upon, now under financialization, do not depend upon banks for their finance. They depend upon the financial market. Now, there is two types of corporations can get finance from two ways. One is they can depend upon the banks, large banks, and borrow money from them. Or you can go to the financial market, issue shares and get funds from the shareholders. So that is called market-based finance. Even in the early 20th century, this was there. But Hilferding his experience was that of Germany, Prussia, those countries. In Germany and Japan, they took a route of financing, bank-based financing, while Americans took the route of issuing shares, market-based finance. Now, it has changed. The world itself has changed. So what they theorized was bank-based finance. Now there is a tendency for the whole world to move towards market-based finance. A third difference is that that finance capital had an exclusive trading area. Now under financialization, there is no exclusive, but they are demanding reduce the tariff. They are also creating exclusive trading blocks like NAFTA, European Union, etc. Now, a fourth difference is that finance capital operated on their own. Now the financialization is actually propped up. The banks are propped up by the central bank. Central bank issues their own currency. Their liabilities are accepted as currencies. And also, there is the too big to fail idea. When a bank fails, when large banks fail, central bank protects them. So it is this basically what implies is that financialization is taking place under the supervision of central banks. A fifth difference is that at that time, there was no global currency as such. Gold was accepted as the world currency. Now we have a quasi-world currency called dollar. So this dollar as the quasi-world currency is also facilitating, according to him, the financialization. So that is the difference between financialization and finance. So there is a difference between the operation of the finance capital and financialization. Now, the next area I want to discuss, we shall discuss, is the causes of financialization. Here, when I looked at the literature, there are many writers discussing what has led to financialization. And one writer, Powell, by the name Powell, he has summarized these main currents. There are four of them. One is one current is by the Monthly Review School, you know, that journal called Monthly Review. And their idea is, some writers from there put forward the idea of monopoly capital. So for them, centralization and concentration of capital that Marx discussed leads to monopoly capital. And the monopoly capital has got two problems. One advantage is that they have huge amount of profits. Monopoly leads to huge amount of profits, but they have less opportunity to invest. So what they have done is they have tried to open up the developing countries to, not developing countries, since they have less opportunities to invest in the real economy, they have turned their attention to the investing in the financial sector. Then another person who has come out, discussed about this is David Harvey. He says this is the financial fix. Again, capital is running away from the real sector to the financial sector. There are a number of others also who has written on this, which I have summarized there. A second reason, second current suggests that globalization of finance has arisen because of the liberalization. This comes from initiated by some global institutions like the Washington Consensus. You know, the World Bank put forward this idea called the Washington Consensus. One important aspect of this Washington Consensus was free movement of capital. Open up, the developing countries are forced to open up their capital market, which is called capital market liberalization. Also, it had another important point about that Washington Consensus. It had a number of points. Another important point was the foreign bank entry. It is thought that foreign bank entry and foreign investment, FDI, as well as foreign institutional investment will modernize these developing countries and they will take the path of growth. This was part of the, and it is this free movement of capital, especially free movement of institutional investment in developing countries, that has created globalization. So one advantage, they have included in their definition the operation of financialization also, the reason for financialization also. In their discussion, they also include the developing countries or the countries in the periphery. A third school of thought is post-Keynesian idea. And this was first suggested by a writer called Hyman Minsky. And Hyman Minsky, his ideas were revived after the financial crisis of 2008. Financial crisis of 2008. He had, I think he had passed away. He wrote he was popular. He wrote his ideas in the 1980s. And his idea was something called financial instability hypothesis. And that idea is that the financial sector, that we know that financial crisis comes from the real sector. But his idea was that it can also come from the financial sector. It's the financial sector that creates instability and it comes to the real sector. So in 2008, financial crisis, his books were republished and his ideas became little more popular. But he also had proposed another idea, which is called money manager capitalism. Now, according to him, the United States capitalism has undergone different stages, like commercial capitalism, managerial capitalism, and during the 1980s, money manager capitalism came into existence. Money manager capitalism was dominating. What do you mean by the money manager capitalism? So, is that some policy changes in the US, also in other countries. We can see this money manager capitalism also in the UK. Now, in the UK, we know that pension is being privatized. So we are to save pension into private. So these pension funds have got huge amount of money with them. They have to invest somewhere. This happened in the United States 80s. This came a little later to UK. So when the pension funds, people started putting money in the pension funds, and the pension funds have a huge amount of money, they need to look for invest somewhere. So since there was a big demand for these shares, companies started issuing shares to the shares. It's a big demand for it. So that is why we said earlier what we discussed, they started depending less on the banks for their money and rather on the share market, because this fund is there. They are looking to invest somewhere. And they started buying. And these shareholders, so this is also sometimes called the shareholder value. So shareholders, these money managers are now controlling the investment in the economy. Now this money, that is why it is called money manager capitalism. So the money managers' motives are different from, let us say, bank's motive, or let us say earlier, the managerial capitalism. the money managers, they changed the way capitalism is operating in the United States and other developed countries, because these money managers want to immediate profit. They want immediate benefit. They are not willing to invest for long term. So they are pushing on to the real investors, give us profit, increase the value of the shares. So what in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, we have found, data shows that there's the long-term investment, which needs physical investment, etc. These corporations are less willing, less hesitant to do that. And what they want to do is they want immediate profit. So they, instead of investing them, they themselves, these corporations themselves are investing in let us say financial assets. So this is what they mean by money manager capitalism. And this itself is led by change in the government provision of pensions, government provision of other housing. All this has led to a money manager capitalism, and it is these changes that has led to this has led to the financialization. Now, a fourth current is put forward by some economics. This is an epochal change in the capitalism, working of the capitalism. Now, they take off from the monopoly, the monthly review school's idea that monopoly capitalists have got huge amount of money with them, huge amount of profits with them, but they have less opportunity to invest. They have convinced the ruling classes to go for this, open up the markets, financial markets of the peripheries, and they are investing there. So that is a global aspect. He says there are pull factors and the push factors. This idea is put forward by that Costas Lapvistas. And according to him, there are two types of factors, the pull factors and push factors. The pull factors, the push factors are the capacity to finance, that the large corporations now do not have to depend upon the commercial banks and look for the conditions they put. They can go and issue the shares and raise the finance. They have become independent of the banks. And there are the pull factors like information technology and the increased liquidity, and also credit rating services, etc., has allowed to go for made them to look for this. So they are now looking for more and more opportunities. They are extracting profits not only from investing in physical real accumulation, increase production, create surplus and take a value, but also they are trying to extract value directly from the people. So that is an area of further discussion, which we can discuss in our later sessions some other day. That is, what is the source of financial profit? That is one area I hope we can discuss. Second is, what is the consequences of this financialization for a developing country like India? We already saw that financialization, globalization of finance is proving to be very costly for them. And I want to study other consequences also. So that is all. We already saw one consequence, that is they are forced to lend a huge amount of they work hard, export and earn foreign exchange, but they give them to the United States, which has helped the US dollar to maintain its position in the world. So that's all what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. I hope I made it clear.
Can I just go first, ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, you know, you're making a distinction between bank finance and financial markets.
Yes.
Do the banks not themselves invest in financial markets?
Yes, they also invest, but that's what is that? What do you mean by that?
So the banks can give or lend money out.
Yes.
But in order to make more money, do they not themselves also invest in financial, the global financial markets?
They must be investing, but they have other opportunities. They can lend it to, like in UK, for example, the government has retreated in providing housing. So there is another market has opened for them. I think banks also will go and invest. The foreign banks going to India and other developing countries, they are also going there. But the other is dominating. Banks, what the literature says is the banking activity, lending to the corporation has declined, and they are looking for opportunities to lend into the consumers. And this new market has opened up, like mortgage market has opened up, which is more profitable, but which is also risky. Yeah. Paul, is that answer that question?
Yeah, just going to reinforce that point, which just been raised. Banks had a traditional function, which was to lend money, in return for which they made a profit. There's very much a secondary or subsidiary role in early capitalism, and over the course of time, banks also, as banking laws were deregulated, anyone could become a bank. As deregulation occurred, as for example in Britain, it meant that banks developed departments which were just there purely for speculation. So they simply started to play the financial markets themselves. They didn't serve society, didn't serve the economy by giving loans. They themselves position. Two departments of traditional lending out of banking, and the other side. So banks literally have two different departments. We meet up with, the lending side of banks if you get a mortgage, or we deposit our money in banks, but they also end up speculating on the world market, buying up stocks and shares and that sort of thing. In other words, they've extended their remit. So the bank's functions have expanded, and increasingly banks become involved alongside other financial institutions, become involved in commodifying money. In other words, money itself become a commodity to chase and purchase in the hope of a profit. So it's very, very parasitic. It has no productive value. It's simply trying to get more money out of the same money. That's why it's called fictitious capital. Trying to extract more profit from existing profit by doing nothing apart from speculating. And banks have an important role to play in that distinction. Banks as financial institutions speculating on the market, buying up financial options in the hope to make a future profit. And this is what happened, of course, in 2008 with the financial collapse in America, with buying up all this toxic debt. So money was packaged up in different institutions, including banks, brought up packages of debt, hoping, of course, to make more money out of it until the whole thing collapsed. So it's a very important distinction between how the function of the banks have changed to include this parasitic dimension. Banks used to serve the economy. It used to oil the economy through flows of money. And over a period of time, banks, amongst other institutions, have become speculators of playing the money markets. They're not serving the market, they're playing the market, which is the difference. Hence, as Thomas suggested, and I agree with this viewpoint, we are in a new epoch of capitalism. It's a new stage of capitalism, where money itself, with traditional capitalism, money is used to produce commodities which are then sold. for a profit. But here, money's not being done for that purpose. It's money is being used to make more money through speculation. So it's a different ball game entirely. It leads to bubbles, and a great mortgage, subprime mortgage bubble exploded in 2008. We have a bubble building up through Bitcoin, which is pure speculation. It's got nothing to do with productivity. So the distinction between productivity in the real economy and all this fictitious capital based upon credit is a different. So it's a different world. So there's been a splitting apart, a separation of money from productivity, and that is destined to be disastrous. It can't go on forever. It will implode. And as we come out of the COVID crisis, we will face that implosion. Economic growth has stagnated. If there's no growth, you have a crisis in capitalism. And that stagnation in growth is caused by finance capital. What Tom calls financialisation process. It's leading to an enormous crash in a few forthcoming years.
Yes, correct. Kalpana?
Sorry, yeah, this topic and subject is way above my head and understanding anyway, but I did go through the thing, and thank you for your introduction as well, Tom. Is that why recently there's been moved to separate the investment bank from the street bank because of all the 2008, 2000?
I've tried.
Yes.
They've tried to, yes.
They're trying to, so that the sort of ordinary, but I don't know whether that's going to work in the long term because they still need, yes, so that's one thing. Does the similar sort of thing of building societies, which used to be almost mutual organization, financial organization in this country, again, they were turned into banks.
Yeah.
And the shareholding, that's the same sort of process as far as I understand. So that's changing this thing. And it's quite interesting because I don't understand anything about finance, but that did seem inappropriate when we were asked to vote for, and the incentive was given to the customers to support the sharehold. Anyway, can I ask two questions from your document, Tom? One is, why do the reserves in the peripheral countries, why do they have to pay to the core countries? Why can't it be held in the peripheral countries? That's one question.
Yes.
And the other one, you mentioned something about Fordist regime of accumulation. Is that sort of the industrial regime of, do you mean, or is there some other financial thing? And the last question, pension fund privatization, was that an ideological move, or was that a political move, or was that an inevitable economic move, the way it's been described?
Okay, let me write down the questions. Can you once more say too many questions?
Shall I repeat them?
Yeah.
The one is,
The first question
at the beginning.
First question is why do they have to keep the money in dollars, isn't it?
Yes. Why wasn't the gold standard kept going?
Yeah.
Because this, as everybody can see, it gives advantage to one particular country.
Yes. What was the second question?
Second question was, you mentioned about Fordist regime of accumulation. I think that's the phrase that was used. Is that the sort of pre-finance thing? And then the third thing was this privatization of pension fund, which obviously has been such a significant event.
Yes.
Is that an ideological move by states, or whether in United States, or was it a political, or was it an economic inevitability?
Yes. Okay, first the US dollar. Why do India keeps that much? India is holding, even if you just do a Wikipedia search, you can find they are holding reserves in other currencies like euro, pound. They are holding with every country they are having trade with.
Okay.
And also they are holding gold. They are also holding in IMF. They are holding in different places. But dollar is still the most accepted. They say that, one theory about, they said in the literature, you say that you find that there is a hierarchy of currencies. So if you say there is a hierarchy of currencies, it's based on which currency he can convert easily into any other currency and generally accepted. And you will find that it is the dollar. So therefore, it's most liquid asset, most convenient asset, and therefore most valuable asset. So everybody like to hold the money in the dollar. That is why it is not accepted. It is not, nobody has declared it as the world currency. It is generally got accepted. And actually from my reading, I understand that Euro is not hoping to become a world currency. They are not trying to achieve that at all. So there is no currency at present which is trying to replace dollar.
Okay.
The second
is, why isn't it gold? Why did they get rid of the gold as the standard?
Gold is,
because that's much more stable, isn't it?
Yeah, it was stable. But then one important problem with the gold was that the gold production in the globally increases by something like 2%. We need global liquidity. We need global liquidity to undertake international trade. So gold was thought to be, accepting gold is a constraint on international trade. I think that it was a practical reason, but there are a lot of struggle went on in between till 1971. Till 1971, we know that there was gold standard was still there.
Yeah.
So a lot of discussion is there on that. About the Fordist regime. Fordist regime is it is called Fordist because of the you gave higher wages to the workers so that workers could buy large scale production of consumer goods. So workers could buy. So that division of labor, and that way even workers could buy consumer goods like cars, which generally only the elite could buy. So there was a Fordist regime. This was called this Fordist regime. So this regulationist schools say that Fordist regime, that's capacity ended by 1970s. So there are that way of division of labor. Ford introduced the assembly line idea. So things could be mass produced and therefore it could be cheap, and workers were more productive. So their wages could be high so that they could buy even luxury goods. This was the idea of the Fordist regime. And its capacity, it was exhausted, that was adopted in every sector, and its possibility was it would not increase productivity. And then a new regime arose, and that new regime, I think it's connected to the next one, the neoliberal ideology. It is more driven by ideology than by economics, because the pension scheme, it is not clear. It is not efficient. The private sector providing pension or public sector, that in the UK's pension scheme is very efficient. The pay-as-you-go scheme. That is how the public pension is arranged. Under the pay-as-you-go scheme, there is no built-up of assets. The present working class pay some percentage of our income to the national insurance. From that a pension pot is made every week, every month or every week. And from that pension pot, everything is given to the next, those who are to the pensioners. And there is an agreement, unwritten agreement, that when the present working class workers, when they retire, those who are working at that time will pay. So this is an intergenerational agreement. This is very efficient. So it is completely, in my opinion, it is completely ideological. These private pensions, it is not efficient at all. It is ideological. They say that there is a pension crisis because the people are living longer. People are entering the workforce later because they are going to the, more people are going to the university, and therefore there is a pension crisis, but it is an exaggerated thing in my opinion. So it is more ideological, that free market, neoliberal ideology is guiding it. I think all of us will agree on that.
Thank you.
Just going back to a gold standard, Kapana, just to clarify this point, up to the 1970s, the United States of America promised to pay each person who had $1 the gold equivalent, locked up in Fort Knox. But as Thomas suggested, over a period of time, the number of dollars floating around far exceeded the gold they held at Fort Knox. So there's an imbalance between gold held and currency floating. And this came to a head. This is called the Bretton Woods arrangement post-World War II. It came to a head in, I think, 1971, when France sent all its dollars to America, demanding them to be exchanged for gold. Literally. So gold bullion was sent back to Paris. And the Americans realized that if everybody did that, there'd be an economic crisis. So a gold standard was abolished for that purpose. And the dollar was then free floating. There's nothing behind it. It's just a currency favored by the world because of American domination. So the domination of the dollar reflects America's political, economic, and military domination of the world, just like the pound did during the heyday of the British Empire. So the gold standard kept the economy, as it were, ticking over. You couldn't have too much activity, too much currency floating around if you didn't have gold reserves behind it. But that connection was broken post-war, and it led to an impending crisis. So that's why it's abolished, because it was unstable. It's unstable. And picking up Tom's point about private pensions and so on, one of the key marks is understanding of financialisation is that when vast amounts of money are generated through exploitation and lots of small number of individuals accumulate vast amounts of wealth, you end up having, as I think we discussed the last couple of weeks, we have an overproduction, under-consumption crisis. There's too much stuff being produced, not being sold, which means that you get a falling rate of profit. And therefore, money holders need to use that money elsewhere. And so what happened was, under Thatcher and Reagan, was that the surplus value, these profits, were utilised to purchase public utility. The so-called state monopoly capitalism is where the state comes in. The state itself, obviously run by the establishment, opened up investment opportunities in the public sector to use up this vast amounts of money which is not being used on productivity. So privatisation become a conduit for all this surplus capital, which wasn't being used for production purposes. So, and of course, all these utilities, gas, electric, railways, were sold off at rock bottom prices. They were undervalued. So it made a vast profit for those with lots of cash in the first place. So this is how surplus profit is used, not for economic growth, not for productivity, but for a cash cow. It's low risk. So all our utilities, gas, electric, railways, all these things have been privatized, including increasingly health services and welfare services are being sold off to those people with vast amounts of money to make even more money. But it's purely parasitic. They produce nothing. They simply become owners of a utility which has actually been given away at very cheap prices. So this is what Tom calls the shareholder capitalism. I've got some figures here. It might be interesting to know is that in 2020, global wealth was estimated at $400 trillion. That's global wealth, and 400 trillion. And 0.01% of the population owned 100 trillion. In other words, 0.01% of the population owned a quarter of the world's wealth. Now, of that 400 trillion, can you guess the richest company in the world? Any idea? Richest company?
Apple?
You'll be surprised. Amazon is worth 2 trillion. Tesla, Apple, Microsoft, 1 trillion each. But the richest company in the world is called BlackRock. BlackRock, you've probably never heard of. BlackRock is an investment company. It exists purely to buy and sell money, to speculate. The biggest, richest company in the world has got nothing to do with productivity. It's to do with investing money to make money. So this is money making money. They produce nothing. So all that surplus cash owned by that 0.01% of the population is put into BlackRock, which is an investment company, who then speculates in stocks and shares. Now they engage in things called shorting, that sort of thing. They speculate. It's got nothing to do with economic growth. So the richest companies do not produce anything at all. They just speculate on the financial markets. They lend money to companies, but most importantly is that they end up running those companies. If they buy sufficient stocks and shares in a company, they can control its direction. And as a consequence, their direction is short-term profit. The whole purpose of investing in companies, if you're a BlackRock investments manager, the whole purpose is to find the quickest way to make a profit for your shareholders. So any profit made by companies is paid back to shareholders straight away. It's not reinvested. So that's why we have an impending economic crisis of production, stagnation. But so the wealthiest people use their money these days to speculate to make more money through financial markets. They don't do it to produce things. And this is a major change from good old-fashioned capitalism, which Marx described very well, and which Lenin then nuanced with monopoly capital. This is an entirely new thing. It's inherently unstable because it's based upon expected, anticipated long profits made from speculation, and it can go badly wrong. We have all these bubbles all the time. The biggest one, of course, was the big tech bubble of 2000, when people poured money into tech companies, which made no profit at all. It's just purely greed, pursuing greed. So bear in mind that the biggest, wealthiest companies these days are finance companies, investment companies, who go around the world playing the currency game, speculate on currency, all sorts of things. They buy up things, they pass on things. A good example in connection to the privatization philosophy is that under the Tories, then Tony Blair, the introduction of PPI, the private-public initiative. So, for example, in hospitals, those speculators built a hospital like the QE2 in Birmingham, which is then leased back to the National Health Service, costing millions and millions of pounds a year in interest. That property right, which accrues interest each year for the next 50 years, has been bundled up so that it's now been passed on to other speculators. So the original purchasers of PPI, the original firms which actually built the hospital, and got the interest, and they'll sold on that investment to other investors. So it gets moved around, which is what happened, of course, in 2008 with the financial crisis, when package credit arrangements and debts were packaged up and passed around the system, and it's bound to implode at some point. So this is why we're in a different era. It's a very different arrangement. Marx barely foresaw this. He barely foresaw it, although it's actually logical and built into the system. As companies become monopolies, they accumulate vast amounts of cash. They've got to do something with it. You can't keep on producing cars. It's impossible. You know, productivity must cease at some point. And then you get vast amounts of cash seeking a new home, which is speculation.
Can I ask, come back on this question about the dollar versus the gold currency? You seem to have, you know, just skipped over this issue, which I think is a very important issue. That, you know, gold was not so stable or something like that is what Tom said. Yeah. And yet that doesn't, your response doesn't answer the question as to why, you know, Saddam Hussein refused to deal, or, you know, oil deals, you know, in dollar. They wanted to do it in gold, and same with Libya. And there is obviously a huge advantage to the United States, so that all dollar purchases are, all oil purchases are done through the dollar. So it is not just a mere convenience. It was a calculated move, surely, on part of the US in order to establish a monopoly of the dollar, which gave them an enormous advantage in making trade deals across the world. And they were able to invest, so-called invest, in foreign countries, irrespective whether they had the gold to back that investment or not. So they were able to basically, hoodwink the world with their power and their dollar. So very little was said by either Tom or even Paul on that.
Well, why do you think that Gaddafi and Hussein were killed? You're quite right to point out that Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi in Libya.
No. Because it's very loud.
No, it's all right. You stopped.
Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein tried to break the dollar monopoly by, as you say, by
What's going on? Paul, you're on mute.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Okay. So going back to Lex's point, this is a very important historical juncture in modern history, is that as soon as countries like Libya, Gaddafi had tried very hard to produce a Pan-African currency to challenge the dollar. And Saddam Hussein did something very similar. As a consequence, Gaddafi was once a friend of the West and a mate of Tony Blair, found himself at war with the invasion of Libya, leading to his death eventually. And his regime was killed because he tried to challenge the dollar's hegemony. And the same thing happened in Iraq, and the same thing's happening in Iran. wars occur in the last resort by the United States when the threat to the dollar seems to be imminent. And the same thing is happening with China. There's no reason why the Chinese currency should not be the currency of the whole world, given the size of China's economy. The impending war with China is about this conflict between dominant currencies. As Lek points out, the country which owns and controls the world currency owns and controls the world. The impending shouting about China, this and that, and they suddenly discovered China's full of human rights abuses all of a sudden. This is just a masquerade or cover to protect the dollar by the United States. So all this warfare, warmongering is always to protect the dollar as necessary. Does that make sense, Lek? Yeah.
Yeah. It does. It
does.
Yeah.
I want to say something, like, can I say?
Yeah, you can carry just answer this one as well. That you've said that the dollar is the most stable and the most trusted at this moment in time, and yet there are moves from Russia, China, and various other, maybe the BRIC world, to establish an alternative currency. So maybe you combine that and what you're going to say.
This search for an alternative currency. My point, I said, accepting gold, the main problem is lack of gold available to go around, okay, to undertake all this. This was foreseen already by Keynes. The Bretton Woods meeting, there are two plans to have this thing. At that time, Keynes had already written a paper and he had circulated this. He said that let us invent a new currency. And he also given a name to it called Bancor, not dollar, but Bancor. But UK, he was representing UK and he was already a well-established, respectable person all over the world. Okay. In spite of all these things, the White Plan, he was a finance secretary of the United States. He was some economist, but he was an official, not an economist. So he came with a White Plan. They had already a plan about world domination with the dollar. And I heard that they threatened Keynes and he withdrew his plan. He did not have the power. And then in the dollar declined in 1970s, they came out with different currencies. Everybody, at that time also they challenged. So they accepted many currencies. First it was 16, then it was 5. They were called key currencies. You can keep reserves in anything like this. But even that all failed. As he said, all constantly emerging countries are challenging. Now China would be challenging the dollar's dominance. But generally, the people, why would China is emerging? Why would they want to keep $1 trillion in dollar? You may ask that question. India is keeping, but why does China want to give $1 trillion in the United States?
America is benefiting hugely, so must be benefiting by forcing the rest of the world to trade in a dollar.
Correct.
There must be some benefit to it.
If you read the literature on when the dollar was in 1971, the dollar, Nixon declared that dollar is no more convertible. People at that time predicted dollar is finished. But still dollar is maintained. In my opinion, it is because of globalization of finance. People are willing to give the money to keep their reserves in dollar. So that is why it is being maintained. In one of the theory that they are discussing, it is, I have mentioned it in my paper, it is called the Braudel School. Ferdinand Braudel, he had written, he was a historian actually. Their idea about financialization is that financialization is also like a wave. From a declining state, the finance goes to the rising centers, advancing centers. So they give the example of Venice. Venice was the financial center when, at that time. So Merchant of Venice. So that was during this thing. And when then it came to Dutch, Holland, then it came to UK. Because when a century is declining, when a new century is rising, the finance flows from there to there. And in this case, it has gone to the US. Now we know that US is a declining economy, but still money is going there. And that is because of, that is what I said, that is because of the place of dollar being accepted as a quasi-world currency. And as you say, they are using not through economic strength, but through military power. It is maintained. I agree with that.
It's also worth pointing out, to pick up Lex's point, is that don't forget that capitalism is also international, and that in each country you have capitalists who belong to a world club. If you want to keep your riches secure and safe, doesn't matter whether you're Indian or Chinese, or Swiss or British or American, you all share the same currency for that purpose. In other words, there may be a conflict of interest between India as a country and the United States, India as a population of people, but there's no conflict of interest between Indian elites and the United States.
Yes.
The richest Indians are part of this international cabal who benefit from the dominance of the dollar. Their wealth is owned in dollars, as in Swiss banks. The dollar is maintained partly because it's also the shared currency of the super rich, and because it's dollars, it can move between countries very easily. The deregulated flow of capital in dollars is a mechanism whereby people remain immensely rich. So it's not as obviously against your interest as it would first appear.
Yeah, just coming back to, I think the point Kalpana raised, I think it was that, you know, the pension funds, why did they become private? What was the motive behind it? And I believe that, you know, whenever they privatize something that is public, there's always somebody's going to benefit from it. Some corporation or somebody, some big rich capitalist is going to benefit from it.
Yeah.
And the other, you know, whether it is privatization of anything, electricity, whatever utilities you do, and pensions funds were exactly the same. And the other advantage of privatizing it is that if you know, the government doesn't have to pay the pension funds with you know, dying age going up and up. So the government just sort of washes its hands away from it. But at the same time, you know, they don't, you know, when pension funds are depleted or because of the economic collapse in stocks and shares and what have you, if the pension provider, private pension provider, is unable to meet the pension funds, the necessary pension funds, then the government washes its hands of it. It's got nothing to do with us, you know. So, you know, I think there were two very good reasons why the government wanted to relinquish its responsibility of pension funds. You know, it was going to create super rich capitalists, you know, benefit them, and other, it relinquishes the responsibilities of it. So I think
that's why it's called state monopoly capitalism. There's strong connection. I mean, state capitalism's got a different meaning in Stalinist terms, but in our terms, state monopoly capitalism is a close blend between the state as an institution and monopoly capital. As we know, that state serves the interests of monopoly capital, and that is why there's been a binge of privatised 70s, Reagan and Thatcher. Anything which is of value in the public sector was sold off at very cheap prices, undervalued on the stock market. So even the next day, if you bought a tranche to say British Telecom, the next day you were thousands of pounds richer because the value of your stock went up 25% the next day. So in the space of one day, you made a fortune. And whole organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, and so on and so forth, and the European Bank, they're all they've all been set up to facilitate the privatization of public assets. So with all this vast amount of wealth which these institutions manage, it's a condition of credit, it's a condition of loans, and also for bailouts, is that the victim country privatizes its public assets. So this is what happened in Greece. As a condition of being bailed out for their debt they couldn't pay, they were forced to sell off all their public assets, harbours, airports, so on and so forth, to these vast wealth holders who came in like vultures. So this is what we call the financialisation process, is that these companies, these investment companies, and also the banks who are in cahoots, are going around the world seeking out investment opportunities, buying up very cheaply public utilities. And this is what's happened, of course, in India with the farmer struggle. Behind all that, behind all that is an attempt to impose a neoliberal regime so they can end up buying up all the assets of farmers. It's a part of a bigger process. It's the latest advanced stage of capitalism.
Correct. That's what I also wanted to say. This farmer struggle is connected to financialization. There is huge amount of, yes, yeah. If agriculture is corporatized, it can be bought up by financially. If you look at FII in India, you'll find so much money has come from 1991. And they are looking for further and further opportunities. In agriculture, it is a very good opportunity.
The classic argument has always been, in order to improve the efficiency of farming, we have to, revamp the whole system. And part of revamping the whole system is privatization of the whole system.
Right.
And I have personal experience of having lived with or gone through the private finance, is it PPI? PFI, Private Financial Initiative. I mean, I worked as an engineer for the central government. Our job was to certify electrical equipment in mines and explosive atmospheres on oil rigs and so forth. And we were a small outfit as part of the health and safety executive. And we would certify all electrical equipment for use in mines and wherever. And for years, they kept on saying that we were a loss-making outfit, and they would, every year we doubled our efforts to bring more output, because we used to charge the customer, the industry, for our services. So we were always bringing in money. We weren't actually, but they always made the accounts to make us as making a loss every year in, year out. They will certainly increase the cost of the personnel department and various things like that. In any way, they eventually, after years of struggle, they eventually said that if you are not going to be privatized, we are going to shut you down. And they did shut us down. We were a group of 50 engineers or so, and they shut us down, and we got a lot of, we fought hard and got our compensation. But the thing was, we negotiated, as part of our redundancy package, we negotiated the use of the government facilities in which we were living, in which we were actually operating. we negotiated a 2-year lease that we will not pay any rent, or we will pay, sorry, 20% of the rent that the government was actually charging us on paper. So, and then we decided to run it as a sort of a cooperative. And so we stuck together and we became a private enterprise using the same facilities. And within 2 years, we were able to buy land and create a purpose-built laboratory and finance it ourselves. And then we moved off the government premises. So then we were making £2 million profit every year on year out. So we were never, ever a loss-making outfit, but the creative accounts always made us look out to be that, you know? Mm-hmm. And this was a political move on part of the Thatcherite regime, that everything needs to be sold off to the private sector.
Okay.
And this is a classic thing. Yeah. Every public utility is made out to be an inefficient public utility.
So why is that?
Yeah.
Why is that the society in general, all over the world, especially in UK, we are forgiving market failure, but people are not forgiving government failure. So if you look at economics, there is enough market failure, but people will forgive the market failure. But government failure we want. The railway is a good example. People are not clamoring.
Interesting.
So what is that? What is that? My question is, what is guiding the people's thought about not forgiving the government failure?
It's even worse than that. It's worse than that, Tom. It's worse than that. Under the current arrangements, what we have is that these speculators and companies given access to buy up services cheaply, or to run services at vast profits. But there's no risk involved, because if they do fail, then the state bails out their failures. So we don't just not forgive government failure. We actually reward market failure, because in the last resort, they would be bailed out. If the rail company can't run a system anymore, stop making a profit, they will walk away from their contract, and the government, i.e. the public, pick up the pieces. So that's the arrangement, is that market failures is okay because the government will bail out their failure. But if it makes a profit, they keep the profit. It's a very nice arrangement. If you can get it, if you're a capitalist, it works very nicely. And that's how it's become. The idea of market failures has disappeared. There's no market failures, only market profitability. If it's not profitable, you can walk away from it. So this whole idea that capitalists take a risk and should be rewarded is nonsense. Yeah. Capitalists make money. If they can't make money, they throw it back to the government, who picks up the pieces. It's a wonderful arrangement for a capitalist, isn't it? Yeah. It works very nicely.
Okay, shall we end our discussion? It is already...
This interesting point as to, you know, why is it that we are not picking up the faults of the government or government failure? And as far as a subject for our further discussions in future, I think we ought to be talking about where do we stand as a working class movement? Where does the British working class movement stand in terms of, you know, organizing